And so, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, once again, in my anticipation for my most anticipated movie of this year, which of course, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I am talking about a past Indiana Jones film. And if you've been following my podcast for the past week or so, you'll have a good guess as to what Indiana Jones film I'm talking about today. It is, of course, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Heck, the name of the film is in the title of this podcast. But before I get into my update thoughts on the fourth Indiana Jones movie, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, and that is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but you prefer listening to these podcasts, well, you can, at Night of the Movies on Spotify. And if you are already listening on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also watch this podcast visually on my YouTube channel and Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to the podcast, don't forget to like, subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and leave me some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there's always things to improve on, and any feedback is much appreciated. Also, I should say, and I think many people might know what I'm going to say here, especially if you've been following my podcasts for the past week or so, it is still the ongoing saga of hay fever. Yes, I've had hay fever troubles ever since my podcast on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and those hay fever troubles have continued. And although my hay fever isn't that bad today, I have still been sneezing this morning. I might be sniffling throughout this podcast, and also, I might sound a bit bummed up as well because of hay fever. It's just what it does to you. And I went swimming this morning, so there's that as well. You know, when I go swimming, I sometimes get this thing that I like to call fuzzy thinking, and so all my points might not be as coherent as they usually are, but nonetheless, this should be a fun podcast to listen to and or watch. So, let's get into it, shall we? Let's get into my thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. My update thoughts on the fourth Indiana Jones movie, because I did talk about this film about a year ago on this channel, but last time I spoke about it, I was here with my good friend Lewis, who's a mega Indiana Jones fan, and I might have a podcast with him coming very soon about the new Indiana Jones, but he's not here today, and I'm flying solo, so this is the first time I'm talking about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull all alone on this channel. It's a tad bit nerve-wracking, but hopefully it will all go well. So, this is the fourth Indiana Jones movie, and it came out in 2008. And this was the first film I remember watching at the cinema. Like, I may have been to the cinema before this movie came out, but I have no recollection that I did. So, whenever I talk to people, I say, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was the first film I remember seeing at the cinema, and so it does hold a special place in my heart because it opened my eyes up as to what the cinema experience could be like. You know, what it's like to sit in a cinema full of people who you don't know, but they're all experiencing the same thing and having a, you know, most of the time very similar reaction. And that's what it was. That's what happened with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I remember watching it, sat next to my dad and my brothers on the front row of the cinema, thinking, why the hell we sat in the front row, but at the same time not caring because I was watching another Indiana Jones film in the cinema, because I grew up loving Temple of Doom and Last Crusade dearly. I didn't grow up loving Raiders of the Lost Ark. I love Raiders now, love it so much, but I didn't grow up loving that movie, but I grew up loving Temple of Doom and watching Last Crusade. I grew up loving Temple of Doom and Last Crusade, and I would watch them continuously leading up to the release of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And then when I finally saw it in the cinema, I fell in love with the film. I fell in love with this movie. 15 years later, or around about 15 years later, I've seen the film probably about 20 times. And each time I watch it, it goes down in my liking. And, you know, there's sometimes when I watch the film and I'll go, you know what, that's a really enjoyable watch. It's got a lot of problems, but I still find it really entertaining. And then there's sometimes when I watch the film, though, and I go, yeah, I really dislike this one. I really dislike the fourth Indiana Jones movie. And when I rewatched it the other night for this podcast for today, I came to the opinion that I was a bit in the middle. I didn't take a huge dislike into it like I have in the past, and like I did last year when I did a podcast on it, or when I did a YouTube review on this movie. But I also didn't find it that of an entertaining watch. There were certain elements of the film which I found really entertaining, but I think where I stand with the fourth Indiana Jones film is that it's disappointing. I don't actually think it's a bad movie, but I think the problem is with it, the big problem that feeds into all the other problems, is that more than anything, it's just a really disappointing movie because it's nowhere near as good as the first three Indiana Jones films. It doesn't have that same spark that the first three Indiana Jones movies had. And you watch it and there's some definite good moments. It's definitely a Spielberg film. Harrison Ford looked like he's having so much fun being back as Indiana Jones, 19 years after he played him since Last Crusade. It's great to see Man Ravenwood back. I quite enjoy the fight sequence that takes place around the ants in the second act of the film. I think some of the action sequences are entertaining. I don't think they're great, but I think they're entertaining. I think Cate Blanchett plays a decent villain. I don't think she does anything wrong in the film. I just don't think the villain's that interesting, but Cate Blanchett's good, Every single time Cate Blanchett's on screen, she's got like a facial expression where you just think she's, thinking a million thoughts. Her face expressions in the movie are so good and so on point. And the John Williams score is great once again. It's my least favourite of all the Indiana Jones musical scores, but it's still great. And, it does have its moments, but it's a very disappointing movie because of 5 big reasons. And here's my 5 big problems with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Problem number 1, it was made too late. It was made 19 years, or around about 19 years, after Last Crusade, and Spielberg, the director, and all 4 Indiana Jones movies, he had moved on to do other stuff. He had directed other films by the time he returned to the Indiana Jones franchise, and if you watch interviews with him surrounding this film, he didn't really want to do another Indiana Jones movie. It was George Lucas who convinced him to do so, and so Spielberg moved on, and many of the cast and creative crew, the creative personnel involved in the original 3 Indiana Jones movies have moved on as well, and you can tell. And my second problem with this film, the second big problem with this movie, is that the action set pieces have none of the excitement of the first 3 Indiana Jones films, and I don't think any of the action sequences work particularly well in the film. I think they're entertaining. I'm not saying the action sequences are bad, but I don't think they're nearly as good as they should be. Problem number 3 is that at times it doesn't feel enough like an Indiana Jones movie. It has a lacking villain. It has undeveloped side characters which are along on the adventure. Oxley, John Hurt's character, and Ray Winston's character Mac, I think, are undeveloped characters who are just kind of thrown in there for the sake of being there. Also, I don't think MacGuffin works really that well, and it takes away from the realism, the verisimilitude, and if you don't know what word is, look it up, but the verisimilitude of this movie, particularly when you get into all the alien stuff, and also that's problem number 3, doesn't feel enough like an Indiana Jones movie. Problem number 4 is that George Lucas came back to write the story of the film, come up with the characters, and come up with MacGuffin, the whole idea with the crystal skull. But by the time he came back to this franchise, he was almost out of touch with reality, because he had all this success with the original Star Wars trilogy, and then it seems like because he had all that success, he became out of touch with reality. And then when he came to do the Star Wars prequels, you can tell in the lines of dialogue between the characters. In the first scene between Anakin and Padme in the Phantom Menace, Anakin says to Padme, "Are you an angel?" And that's just not how people speak. And you can tell that the George Lucas that you see writing and directing the Star Wars prequels is the same George Lucas that you get writing and coming up with all the ideas for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because the whole stuff with the MacGuffin and, the Crystal Skull and all the aliens, it just shows how out of touch reality I think George Lucas got by the time this film was made. And problem number 5 is that it's not nearly as well written as the previous 3 Indiana Jones movies, with laughable dialogue, which feels like it's verging on fanfiction. Yes, fanfiction. I'm one of those people who don't think fanfiction is actually a bad idea. You know, sometimes it gets a negative rap, fanfiction. I don't really understand why. There's some fanfiction out there that I've read in the past for some of my favourite shows and films and whatnot, and I've really enjoyed some of that fanfiction. But the problem is, when you have a Indiana Jones movie directed by Spielberg, with George Lucas heavily involved, with Harrison Ford returning as Indiana Jones, and with Karen Allen returning as Marion Ravenwood, you expect it to not feel like fan fiction, and yet there are certain parts of the movie which do. For example, when Indy survives the atomic bomb, you can almost imagine some huge Indiana Jones fan writing this on his laptop, going, "Oh my god! Imagine if Indy somehow survived an atomic bomb explosion." You know, it's the sort of thing which maybe sounds good in a conversation on a sheet of paper, but wouldn't really work in a movie, and yet it's in this film in quite a significant scene. And I think those are the 5 big problems of the movie, and I'm going to get into each of them in their own separate way throughout this podcast as well. But one other thing I want to say is that there are other problems with the film. You know, it's not just those 5 big problems. You know, they're the 5 big problems. There are small problems in the film as well, which do feed into the 5 big problems. Like, you have the whole sequence with Mutt basically becoming Tarzan during the jungle chase, which doesn't really work. You know, and all the monkeys sort of, I don't really know what they do. It's like they find Tarzan in mud. Hopefully you know what I mean. And also, I keep saying that, by the way. It's become a habit when I'm doing these podcasts. I keep saying "and also," when really I should say one or the other. And so apologies for keep doing that throughout this podcast today. But I mean, the CGI in this film, there's way too much of it, and I'll talk about that again a bit later in this podcast as well. But the CGI is an issue in this film, and just because of the way it looks and the fact that it's a bit dated because it's CGI from 2008, and it doesn't look great, and it has other problems, definitely. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's just this film's just got 5 big problems, nothing else. No. The 5 big problems mean that it's got all these little problems as well, but for the sake of this podcast today, I'm not going to dwell on the little problems. I'm going to dwell on the 5 big problems. So let's talk about problem number 1. The fact that this film was made 19 years, or around about 19 years, after Last Crusade. Last Crusade was made, the third Indiana Jones film, it was made in 1989, and this film was made in 2008. In that period, Spielberg had directed how many movies? You know, and he'd also directed Schindler's List. And during this period as well was also the Young Indiana Jones series. And the Young Indiana Jones series had a cameo by Harrison Ford in the episode titled Mystery of the Blues. Great episode, by the way. And if the Young Indy show ever comes on any streaming service, I highly recommend people watch that episode, Mystery of the Blues. Mark it in your diary. Superb piece of television. But Harrison Ford makes a cameo as Indiana Jones at about the age of 40 in that episode. And George Lucas shot that cameo. And it was around that time which George Lucas, according to Wiki this is, by the way, said, though I don't know if this is completely accurate because it's off Wikipedia, and you know sometimes Wikipedia isn't that accurate, but for the sake of this podcast, that's what I looked on for today. But yeah, George Lucas, when he was shooting Harrison Ford's cameo for the Young Indiana Jones show, he thought maybe another Indiana Jones film could work, and maybe we could see where Indy was at however many years after Last Crusade. And that's when he first came up with the idea that maybe a 4th Indiana Jones film could happen. And then the film was in production hell for a very long time, to the point that people like M. Night Shyamalan were coming in writing scripts and they were just being scrapped because they didn't work. And the reason that these scripts didn't work, and the reason that they never came to fruition, is because Spielberg, George Lucas and Harrison Ford, the main 3 people behind the Indiana Jones franchise, all had to agree on one idea, and they just couldn't. You know, if you watch interviews surrounding Spielberg and this film, you'll see that he's not that interested in making another Indiana Jones movie, and he speaks about that. He goes, "What? Let's just leave it 3. You know, the characters ride off into the sunset at the end of Last Crusade. That's the perfect end to the Indiana Jones films. Just leave it there." And he was very much against making another Indiana Jones film, but he did come back to do it. But they all had to go on the same idea. Harrison Ford, Spielberg, and George Lucas all had to agree on the same idea for another Indiana Jones film, and that took a long time, to the point that there were scripts where Nazis were the villains once again. But Spielberg was against that because by this point, by the time they were talking about doing another Indiana Jones film, Spielberg had already directed Schindler's List, and he didn't want to do another film where Nazis were presented in a somewhat comical fashion, and so he was against doing Nazis in this film, and it took so long for a good idea to come, and even when the idea of the Crystal Skull came with the aliens, and George Lucas conceived of this idea with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which was eventually made, Spielberg wasn't totally convinced. In fact, he did a lot of compromising, and there's this funny story on the internet that I watched in an interview with Spielberg about this on YouTube, where Spielberg tells a story, and I'm gonna get it wrong here, I might paraphrase badly, and apologies if I do, but apparently George Lucas went to Spielberg and said, I've come up with this idea for a fourth Indiana Jones movie, it involves aliens, and Spielberg's like, I've already done 2 movies with aliens, I did Close Encounters and E.T., I don't want to do another movie with aliens. So George Lucas comes to him about 2 weeks later and says, okay, it's not aliens anymore, and Spielberg's really, really happy, he goes, yes, great, best news, you made my day. Best news of the day, something like that. And then George Lucas goes, yeah, it's not aliens, it's interdimensional beings. And Spielberg goes, no, that's just aliens. So that's what George Lucas called the aliens in this film. Interdimensional beings. But they are aliens. And that's how the film eventually went into production. Spielberg compromised and went, okay, they're called interdimensional beings, let's put the film into production. And I don't know when it went into production, I'm going to guess 2007, this film went into production. But at the same time, Spielberg didn't want to go out of the country to shoot this movie. He didn't want to leave America to shoot the film because he didn't want to be away from his family for too long. So a lot of the fourth Indiana Jones movie is shot in the US. And the point of that whole story about how the film came to be, how the fourth Indiana Jones movie came to be, is to show you that the people behind this movie could never really agree on an idea because it all moved on. The third Indiana Jones movie was designed to be the last one. You know, they all ride off into the sunset in the end. It's a perfect ending to the Indiana Jones trilogy. Then they're trying to revive it. And the problem is because there was all these rumours, from what I've gathered about, I mean, I don't even remember these rumours because I don't remember hearing about the movie till about a year before it came out. I remember, I'm in silent here, when I did hear that a fourth Indiana Jones movie was happening, I was beyond excited. I was like the giddiest kid in the world. But, you know, I didn't really know about this, so I've heard about this on the internet. There was all these wild rumours about a new Indiana Jones film happening, you know, throughout the late 90s into the early 2000s. And because of all these wild rumours, expectations were always going to be too high and too unrealistic. To the point that no matter how good or bad a new Indiana Jones film this fourth film was going to be, it didn't matter because expectations were too high with Indiana Jones fans. And so the fact that this film was in production hell for so long was one of the big problems leading to this film. No matter how good it was going to be, or no matter how bad this film was going to be, no matter how good or bad it was going to turn out, it didn't matter because the film was in production hell, and there's all these wild rumours, and that already resulted in negative backlash for the film. That's what happened with the Star Wars prequels. That's what happened with the Star Wars prequels. People built up these ideas of what the Star Wars prequel was going to be, and then they ended up not being great movies, and people were really disappointed in them. And that's what happened with Kingdom Across the Skull, and that's because the film was left too long to be made. And here's the thing with the Indiana Jones franchise. I would equate it to the Arrested Development TV show. Like, if anyone doesn't know what Arrested Development is, the show is currently on Disney Plus. I'd highly recommend it. It's one of the best comedies I've ever seen. It's so well written, it's clever, and it's it's just pure comedy gold. At least the first 3 seasons of Arrested Development are anyway. Because the thing is about Arrested Development is it was cancelled after its 3rd season. But that was in about 2008. And in 2013, Arrested Development was revived by Netflix for its 4th series. And although the 4th series I don't think it was bad. It's definitely still got a lot of perks. It was nowhere near as good as the original 3-season run of Arrested Development. And the show was once again revived in 2019, once again by Netflix, for a 5th series. But the 5th series of Arrested Development didn't work either. And the point is, Arrested Development had this great 3-season run, then all the cast and crew behind that show and the writers, they moved on to other stuff, and then when they came back for the revival, it didn't have the same spark as the original Arrested Development run. And that's how I feel about the Indiana Jones franchise. It's a very similar idea there. You know, when the first Indiana Jones movies are happening, there was a spark there. It was lightning in a bottle, and then they try and revive it. You know, they try and revive the franchise however many years later, and it doesn't have the same spark. And much like the 4th series of Arrested Development, I think the 4th Indiana Jones movie has some really great moments, but ultimately, it's nowhere near as good as any of the previous 3 Indiana Jones films. And side note here, I really hope that the 5th Indiana Jones movie is not as bad as the 5th series of Arrested Development. Because speaking as somebody who loved Arrested Development during its original run, when I was watching it, and when I rewatch it now actually, and this is why it's on my mind right now, I've been rewatching it recently on Disney Plus. But I really hope that the 5th Indiana Jones movie is nothing like the 5th series of Arrested Development, because Series 5 of Arrested Development I couldn't even finish. And I'm hoping I can at least finish the new Indiana Jones movie, because yeah, I really was disappointed by Arrested Development Season 5. But you understand the comparison I'm making. You know, this TV show, this golden comedic TV show known as Arrested Development, and this golden franchise known as Indiana Jones, they had line in a bottle with their original runs, and they tried to revive both ideas, and it didn't really work. There were some perks when they tried to revive it, but it wasn't the same. And I think what I'm trying to prove there is that it's not the best idea to revive these franchises, especially with the same people, because Spielberg had moved on to other things, and I think you can tell that he's tired of making another Indiana Jones movie with the directing in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's still well made. I don't think any Spielberg movie is badly directed, but, you know, it doesn't have the same tightness in the direction as any of the previous Indiana Jones films, because Spielberg didn't really want to make another one. And, you know, don't say to me now, by the way, that, oh, Spielberg, you know, by the time he came out to doing Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he just wasn't a good director anymore. No, after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, Spielberg directed some stellar movies. Bridge of Spies is very well made. I also think that The Post is very well directed, and I really enjoyed Ready Player One. You know, Ready Player One had the magic that this film lacked. You know, that had the popcorn enjoyment factor that this film just didn't have. And then lately, in the past couple of years, Spielberg has directed two of these, you know, best directed films in my opinion, with his remake of West Side Story, which is so masterfully directed, and The Fabelmans, which has direction which, you know, there's a certain directing style of The Fabelmans which really captivated me. And so Spielberg wasn't past his prime when he made this movie. I just don't think he wanted to make another Indiana Jones film, and that's further exemplified by the fact that he chose not to come back to this 5th Indiana Jones movie. Is James Mangold directing? James Mangold, director of Logan, Ford v Ferrari, Girl Interrupted, and so on and so on and so on. You know, it's not Spielberg directing anymore, because I don't think his heart was in it. And I think many of the other people involved in the previous Indiana Jones films who came back to this new Indiana Jones film, well, I say new Indiana Jones from the 4th Indiana Jones movie, just weren't the same. They moved on. Much like what happened with Arrested Development, they moved on and it wasn't the same anymore. And I do think that this leads into problem number 2. I've just spoken about the first big problem that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull faced. Here is the second big problem that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had. And that is that the action set pieces have none of the excitement of the first few Indiana Jones movies, and they're not great action set pieces either. You know, there's so many memorable action set pieces from any of the original 3 Indiana Jones films. But then, The first action scene in the fourth Indiana Jones movie, in this Indiana Jones film, is Indy being chased in Area 51, the big warehouse. And that action sequence is fine, but I mean, I don't dislike it. It's entertaining, but you can tell that it's not Harrison Ford doing those stunts. The way it's shot, it's so clearly a stunt man, and because you never really see his face, it's always covered by the shadows. You know, when he's running on the top of the tiles in the warehouse, you can tell that's not Harrison Ford, and it doesn't work. And then, as the action sequences in the film progress, you know, as you see more of the action sequences, you get that one that takes place in Princeton where Indy is in his professor uniform and everything, he's dressed normally, and then you get I forgot who they are now, but you get the people chasing after him, and he's on the back of Mutt's bike, you know, and they got their chase sequence through Princeton. Hopefully you know what sequence I'm talking about, and that sequence is fine as well. It's not a bad sequence, it's entertaining to watch, but it feels, and I'll get onto this a bit later, like fanfiction, like, you know, two people sat around, two mega Indiana Jones fans, and went, oh, imagine if Indiana Jones was dressed in his professor uniform, being chased through his hometown. Oh, imagine how exciting that would be. And, you know, it's an entertaining action sequence. The John Williams score worked very well during that sequence, but it's not great. That sequence isn't a great action set piece, at least in my opinion. As the film carries on, you know, they get the jungle chase, which I was so excited to see, you know, when I remember watching the cinema, being so excited. I'm like, oh my god, look at that jungle cutter. Is Indy going to take that jungle cutter down somehow? And he does, but it's not in a very exciting way. You know, just uses like this missile gun to take it down, and then the remainder of that sequence is pretty much Indy going from vehicle to vehicle, ramming into the villain's vehicle. You know, it's not that great. It's not as great as it should be. And I think the best action set piece in the movie is the fight sequence that take place around the ants, because that actually feels gritty. You know, you actually see Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones get a bit of a nosebleed on that sequence. You know, he gets punched and you really feel like he's getting punched. And you really feel like he's getting hurt. You know, something you never really felt in any of the previous action sequences in this movie. And I also think that, you know, towards the end of that sequence when all the ants are going into the Russian soldier's mouth, it's terrifying. It's great. I really like that sequence. To be honest, that is probably the one great action sequence in this film. But none of the other action sequences are that great, and I get it. You know, Harrison Ford was much older when he returned to do this movie. I understand that. I get it. But still, the action sequences should be so much better, especially with Spielberg directing. And yet they just don't have the same flair that they did in the previous Indiana Jones movies. They've just been more exciting. Sure, the John Williams musical scores were great during all those action set pieces, but they're just not that good, or they're not as good as they should be. And that's problem number two. I don't think the action set pieces are near as good as they should be, and they don't have the same excitement and the same thrill when you watch them that the action sequences in the first three Indy movies did. Then you get on to problem number three, which is at times the fact that this doesn't really feel, I mean, it's not a fact, but in my opinion, at times this doesn't really feel like a proper Indiana Jones movie. You know, you get underdeveloped characters. Ray Winston's character Mac, I think Ray Winston can be a good actor, and I've seen him in certain films which I really liked him in. I liked him in Martin Scorsese's Departed. And he did this film 2 years after The Departed, by the way, and a very different performance. But thing is, though, I don't care about the character of Mac because he's an underdeveloped character. I don't think Ray Winston's given off a bad performance because I don't think he's been given that much to play around with. It's like I don't think Shia LaBeouf gives off a bad performance as much. I just don't think the character's that interesting, and I don't think he's been given that much to play around with. And so what you get is characters like Mac, Ray Winston's character, Mutt, and also Oxley, you know, John Hurt's characters. Those characters I don't think are that well developed. I think what you have with those characters is some interesting ideas revolving around them, but that's really it. Like, we find that one point that Indy and Mac were close friends and were in Berlin together at one point and were double agents. That's all we know about Mac. Great. And also we know that he does anything, you know, he does anything for the highest bidder. That's all we really know about him. There's no character arc there. He's an underdeveloped character. And that's the same with Mutt. What's interesting about him? Okay, he's dropped out of school. He's a bit impulsive, like his father, who turns out to be Indiana Jones. Okay, what else is going on there? Oh, not much. Okay, cares about his mother. He had a relationship with Oxley, John Hurt's character. But what's the character there? What's his character arc? I don't understand what it is. And then you get onto John Hurt's character, Oxley, the late great John Hurt. John Hurt is an amazing actor. What's that film? Was in 10 Wellington Place. He's great in that movie, and he has such an effect when he's on screen in Alien as well, especially when the alien goes through him, and you feel so much emotion when that alien goes through him in Alien because it's John Hurt. And in this movie, he comes on screen, and if I'm being honest, I didn't even know it was John Hurt till about 5 years ago. I didn't even realise, oh my god, John Hurt was in this movie because of all of his makeup that he's gone in. He's got a very hairy face in this film. But the thing is, there's nothing really about that character. Okay, we understand that he goes insane because he's chasing after the MacGuffin in the film. He chased after the MacGuffin before Indy did. He's become insane because of the crystal skull. We understand that. But what else is there about his character? He's just there, really. And it's a shame because it's played by the late, great John Hurt, who was an amazing actor. And yet, I think he was kind of wasted in this film. And the villain is lacking as well. And when you have Cate Blanchett playing your villain, there shouldn't be lacking characterization there. I think the best part of the villain, I don't even know what the villain's name is. It's like Salk or something. That shows you how interesting I find the villain in this film. I don't know what the villain's name is. I know what all the villains' names are from the previous Indiana Jones movies. In Raiders, it's Belloc. In Temple of Doom, it's the Mola Ram. And in the third film, it's Donovan. And then you get into this movie, and I think it's Salk or something. I don't really care. The character's not that interesting, okay? She's going after the crystal skull. She's obsessed with artifacts. We've already had that with Belloc in Raiders. Why are we having it again? Okay, she's got a sword. Cool. Why? Oh, because she can. Oh, yeah, okay, that's fine. It's like, there's nothing that interesting or compelling about the villain in this movie, other than the fact that she's played by Cate Blanchett. If somebody else played the character, sorry, I've got a bit of an itchy nose right now, I don't know if you notice if you're watching this on YouTube, but the only interesting thing about the villain is actually played by Cate Blanchett, and Cate Blanchett gives off a good performance. Cate Blanchett is one of those actors where she just sinks into a character, and in this film, just with her looks and her facial expressions and her gestures, I don't want to play around with that villain. But it's nothing about the writing. It's just all down to Cate Blanchett's performance, because Cate Blanchett is one of the best actresses working today. And also, she was awesome at Glastonbury the other day when the sparks came on. She did that awesome dance routine on Glastonbury a couple of days ago. But that's neither here or there. I just wanted to mention it nonetheless. But she is good in the movie. The villain is okay, but that's all down to Cate Blanchett. It's not down to the writing. And I think the MacGuffin as well takes a lot away from this film because it's so unrealistic, the MacGuffin. It's just weird. The crystal skull, and then it turns out to be the skull of an alien, and then in the final act of the film, it turns out there's been an alien spaceship underneath this kingdom in Akator. I'm not really sure. It doesn't really work that well. It takes away, it takes away from the grounded realism of the previous three Indiana Jones films, something which was so vital in the Indiana Jones franchise up to this point. What makes Last Crusade, Temple of Doom, maybe not Temple of Doom, but in my opinion, I'm not going to say Temple of Doom. What makes Last Crusade, Temple of Doom, and Raiders of the Ark so entertaining and so interesting and so engaging to watch is because they are grounded in reality. Sure, crazy things happen in those movies. When the Lost Ark opens, spirits take over and faces melt in Raiders. In Temple of Doom, someone's heart magically gets taken out of their body. In Last Crusade, Donovan has this really horrific death. There's all these weird and crazy things that happen in Last Crusade, which is so unearthly. And what I mean is, in the previous three Indiana Jones movies, which are so unearthly, but in this film, the whole idea of the MacGuffin, the crystal skull, is unearthly. It's not just the end of the film, it's the whole idea of the crystal skull. It doesn't work, and it takes part of the realism of the film. Something which an Indiana Jones movie shouldn't be doing. It really shouldn't be doing, and that leads me to problem number 4. That's problem number 3, the whole stuff that it doesn't feel enough like an Indiana Jones film because of underdeveloped characters and the fact that MacGuffin takes you out the realism of the film. And that leads me on to problem number 4, and that is the problem surrounding George Lucas and this movie. The fact that when George Lucas, and it's not a fact, but I'm going to say it's a fact because of how annoyed it makes me. I don't know if you can tell, I get quite annoyed talking about films I don't like, and I'm a bit annoyed talking about Kingdom Crystal Skull, because it's not that I don't like it, but I just don't like it either. You know, the fourth problem with Kingdom Crystal Skull, the fourth big problem, is that by the time George Lucas came up with the characters for this movie, came up with the story of this film, and came up with the MacGuffin of the film and the Crystal Skull, he was out of touch with reality. You know, what he's spoken about this with the Star Wars prequels, you know, when he directed and wrote the Star Wars prequel trilogy, you can tell he doesn't know how to have a normal conversation with somebody. As I've already mentioned, the first conversation you have between Anakin and Padme in The Phantom Menace, Anakin asks Padme, "Are you an angel?" That's not how people speak to each other. And there's many lines of dialogue like that throughout the Star Wars prequels. And the thing is, I think what happened was George Lucas got all this money from, and all the success from his earlier works in American Graffiti and THX 1138, both great movies, and in the original Star Wars trilogy, you know, which was all heavily involved with. He directed some of those movies as well, and also he had some great success with the previous Indiana Jones films, and he came back to young Indiana Jones and he thought, you know what, I was doing quite good here, you know, I'm still grounded. But then he made the Star Wars prequels. You know, he made Young Indiana Jones before the Star Wars prequels. He didn't really make Young Indiana Jones. He was involved as an executive producer on that show. But, you know, he was involved in Young Indiana Jones before the Star Wars prequels. And then, you know, he does the Star Wars prequels and he gets really out of touch with reality. But then he wants to make another Indiana Jones film. And you can tell how out of touch with reality he is because he's so obsessed with doing aliens now. Because he's done Star Wars for the past however many years. Because he did Clone Wars around the same time as well. You know, he did the first Clone Wars movie around the same time, which didn't really work. Because he's so obsessed with aliens and intergalactic whatnot. You know, he's saying, oh, let's have aliens in an Indiana Jones movie. Let's have it go sci-fi. Because all my sci-fi work in the past has earned me millions and maybe even billions of dollars. Let's have this new Indiana Jones film go sci-fi because I'm involved in it. And that's not how George Lucas speaks, but that's what I imagine him being like when it comes to this film. And I know there's some people online going, you know, there's some people who defend this movie going, oh yes, all the stuff with the aliens in the film, it's a nod to the time where the film is set, because this film is set in the 50s, and during the 50s there were many B movies, you know, B science fiction movies that were being made. And I know there's some people who say, oh, that's why the aliens in the film, because it's a nod to those science fiction movies from the 1950s. And, you know, I understand where they're coming from, but I disagree with that. I think the reason there are aliens in the film is because George Lucas was so obsessed with his own ego. And by the way, I love George Lucas. He came up with the Star Wars franchise, and I don't know if you can tell behind me, I adore the Star Wars franchise to pieces, you know, and I have such a great affection for his work, and I also think he did a great job before going into Star Wars with American Graffiti and with THX 1138. Great movie, I've watched that. But the thing is, after he had all the success, I just think he became so obsessed with his own ideas that he didn't really allow anybody else to contribute to what he was doing, and he became so obsessed with his own ideas doing sci-fi that, yeah, he just became too obsessed with sci-fi, too obsessed with aliens because of the Star Wars franchise, and that resulted in in a film that didn't need aliens. I don't understand why an Indiana Jones film needed aliens, other than George Lucas wanting them because he was out of touch with reality. He was out of touch. Out of touch with reality by this point when he came to make another Indiana Jones film, when he came to be involved in another Indiana Jones film, should I say? And he just wanted to go sci-fi because he'd done sci-fi so many times in the past, and it worked out for him, at least commercially. And so that's problem number 4 there. And problem number 5 with this movie, for me, is that it's not nearly as well written as the previous 3 Indiana Jones films, with laughable dialogue, which feels like it's verging on fanfiction. Like, I've already spoke about this when I spoke about, the other problems that I have with this movie. The writing, I think the characters are underdeveloped, but also the dialogue isn't that great. There's moments of dialogue in this film which are really badly written. There's one moment in the film where just after the 3 times it drops sequence where, our main characters are going down these 3 waterfalls, and by the way, at the end of that sequence, they're all miraculously unscathed and none of them are drowned, which makes no sense, but that's a smaller problem that I'm not going to dwell on. But, after that sequence, Indy's saying, I have to take the skull there I have to take the skull to his kingdom by myself. And then Marion asks, why? And then Indy goes, because it told me to. And say, what? When did this crystal skull have a conversation with you? When did it have a telepathic conversation with you? What? That's not even... What is that line of dialogue? What is that? And then in the finale of the film, in the final act, in the last 20 minutes of the movie, you see all the rocks coming up around this temple, which our main characters are at, and you see the spaceship coming up as well, and one of the characters asks, I don't know who it is, but he asks, is that spaceship going to go into space? And then Oxley, John Hurt's character, goes, more like the space between spaces. What's that line of dialogue as well? And those are just 2 examples in this film. There's so many other examples of lines of dialogue which really don't work in this movie. And I think that just shows you how badly it's written. But at the same time, I should say, give credit where credit's due. There is one line of dialogue in the film which I think is absolutely superb and which plays in my mind daily. And that's his line of dialogue that Jim Broadbent's character... By the way, I often forget that Jim Broadbent's in this film, but Jim Broadbent's character, who is Indy's professor friend, he says to Indy when they're back at Indy's house early in this movie, I've just got up here now. There's this line of dialogue Jim Broadbent's character says, which I think is so meaningful though. We seem to have reached the age where life stops giving us things and starts taking them away. He says that to Indy in his house early in the movie. And I think that line of dialogue is so poignant. But then, that line of dialogue is overshadowed by these terribly written lines of dialogue throughout the rest of the film. And I do think it is badly written. And I think because it's badly written, it verges on fan fiction. And because it has these many moments which really don't work, the whole stuff with the atomic bomb and Indy somehow managing to survive from the atomic bomb by hiding in this fridge. Well, I say hiding in this fridge. He goes in this fridge and then the fridge, is thrown out of the atomic bomb explosion early in the movie. Hopefully you know what scene I'm talking about. I'd be surprised if we didn't. The nuke in the fridge scene, that's what so many people have called it. The nuke in the fridge scene, which makes no sense, but it is like mega Indiana Jones fans have sat down to write that and go, imagine if Indiana Jones somehow managed to survive an atomic bomb explosion. How awesome would that be? But in reality, it's not that awesome because the scene doesn't make sense. Indy should be dead when he walks out of that fridge after the atomic bomb has exploded. Is it atomic bomb? Is it atomic bomb? Isn't it atomic bomb? I'm not entirely sure. I think it is. But Indy should be dead after that atomic bomb has exploded. His guts should be splattered all over that fridge. He should have bruises all over himself. He should have cuts. But he just walks out fridge and then looks over the atomic bomb exploding. And you sit there and go, that doesn't make sense. As I've already briefly touched on, the whole scene where 3 times it drops. How did none of the characters drown there? How did none of the characters get bruises? Or how are the characters fine after that sequence? And there's so many moments like that where it feels like fan fiction. And I've got nothing against fan fiction. I think sometimes fan fiction is a really positive thing to show your love of something. But when you have an Indiana Jones movie directed by Spielberg with George Lucas involved and with Harrison Ford coming back as Indy, with Karen Allen coming back as Marion Ravenwood, and with all these other big huge name stars in the film like Shia LaBeouf, Kate Blanchett, Ray Winston and John Hurt, when you have this cast in this movie and all these people involved, it shouldn't feel like fan fiction, but it does. And that's a problem with this movie, and I think the whole idea of fan fiction, the whole idea of ideas which sound good on paper but don't really work when they come down to the film itself, is a lot down to the fact that it'd been 19 years since the last Indiana Jones movie. I think, all my 5 big problems are valid reasons as to why this film fails in comparison to the previous 3 Indiana Jones movies. But I think that problem number 1 is the biggest movie. It's the biggest movie, so I can't even speak because I'm sweating so. I'm not even thinking straight because I'm sweating so much. My nose is so itchy right now, and I've been swimming early today. But I'm gonna push through. But yeah, I think the biggest reason, that's what I meant to say, the biggest reason as to why this film didn't work or is not as good as the previous Indiana Jones movies is because everybody had moved on. Everybody involved in the previous Indiana Jones films had moved on by the time that they all wanted to come back, or that they did come, or that by the time they came back to this 4th Indiana Jones movie, they'd moved on to do other things, and it shows because the writing isn't there, the directing isn't there. It's still a well-made movie. I don't think any Spielberg film is badly directed, really. Saying that, I think Always, which he directed in 1989, the same year he directed my favourite movie of all time, but in 1989 he also directed Always, which I think is his worst directed movie, and it's got some pretty poor direction in there, but that's not a topic right now. It's a topic for another time. But you get the point I'm making. I don't think Spielberg's directing is bad. I do think this film definitely has its moments, but it doesn't. They're trying to capture light in a bottle again. They're trying to recapture light in a bottle, and I don't think it worked. And the reason I think it might work with this new Indiana Jones, with Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny, is because it's not Spielberg directing anymore. I love Spielberg. I do. I love The Fablemans. I love this take on West Side Story. I really love Ready Player One, and I can't wait to see what he does next. But I think he needs to stay away from the Indiana Jones franchise. I think his heart was in there with the first 3 Indiana Jones films, but I don't think his heart was there with the 4th Indiana Jones movie. I really don't think it was. And I'm glad that James Mangold's coming into direct, because James Mangold has directed, as I've already mentioned, films like Logan, Ford v Ferrari, Walk the Line, Girl Interrupted. He's clearly a gifted and strong director. He can, he's a versatile director, much like Spielberg, who, both directors have worked in so many genres. And I'm excited. I'm happy with the idea of a different director doing this new Indiana Jones film, because maybe the heart will be in it more. Maybe they'll be able to bring something new to this franchise, something which I think Spielberg just couldn't by this point. And also, I said it again there, and also, but another reason that shows you how much this film has moved on since the last Indiana Jones movie is the CGI. There's not one thing I really touched on yet, although I did touch on briefly early on, but the CGI, it developed a lot since Last Crusade, but when you watch it now, some of the CGI in the film is clearly CGI, you know what I mean? It's dated, and I think they use it too much. It was like Spielberg suddenly became fascinated with CGI all of a sudden when he made this movie, even though he'd worked with it quite a few times beforehand. But it was like he became obsessed with CGI when it comes to his movie, and he's using it left, right, and centre. And I think particularly in the jungle chase sequence, it is noticeable. And they actually went and filmed that jungle chase sequence in some forest somewhere. I'm not really sure where, but they filmed it in some jungle, yeah. And the thing is, it looks fake. It looks like it was shot on a sound studio or on some set where it's just blue screen behind, and it just really doesn't work. And then you get to the final act of the film, and there's all this stuff with Kate Blanchett villain going, "I want to know, I want to know, I want to know," to the crystal skull, to the skull that has been put in and coming into this alien. Hope you understand what scene I'm talking about. It's hard to explain, and I get annoyed when I start to explain scenes, when I start to break down scenes from King of the Crystal Skull. But that scene towards the end where Kate Blanchett's villain's going, "I want to know, I want to know, I want to know." The CGI there is so poor, and the eyes start to get fire coming out of them. It just really doesn't work. And yeah, it's like all of a sudden the filmmakers behind this movie become obsessed with CGI. In fact, maybe that was more George Lucas, because of the amount of, because of how far he developed CGI with the Star Wars prequels. Because say all about Star Wars prequels, whether you love them or hate them, whatever, the CGI and the way visual effects had developed with the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith is particularly fantastic. And so maybe it was more George Lucas, after he'd worked on the Star Wars prequels, going, you know what, this film needs more CGI. Maybe it was him and Spielberg in the editing suite going, oh yeah, CGI, he did a really good job with that in Star Wars prequels. I mean, I just don't know. But I do think the biggest problem is that this film was made 19 years too late. And that it really shouldn't have been made. This Indiana Jones franchise should have been left with all the main characters, all the characters we loved from Last Crusade, riding off into the sunset in a perfect movie, in my opinion. But it wasn't. And I should talk about the John Williams musical score, because I have dedicated, a segment of all these podcasts and the Indiana Jones movies to the John Williams musical scores. And the John Williams musical score, as I already mentioned in this podcast, is good. It's not a bad score. I really like it. I've listened to it quite a few times. In fact, I was listening to it this morning. It's a good score, but there's nowhere near as good as his scores for the previous Indiana Jones films. I don't think it has as many memorable themes like Raiders has so many memorable themes. It has, obviously, Raiders was the film that gave us the Raiders Mad, Indiana Jones' theme, bum ba-dum bum, bum ba-dum, and also we had Marion's theme in that film as well, bum ba-da-da-dum dum bum. But then you also have the theme for the Ark in this movie, bum 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. You have those themes alone, which are so iconic. When you hear those themes, you immediately think Raiders of the Lost Ark. And those themes come back in this film, but I'm not sure if that was totally needed. I don't think that's John Williams' fault, though. That's probably Spielberg going, why don't here you put the Ark theme? Why don't here you put Marion's theme? Why not here you put Indy's theme back in? I understand why those themes are back. I'm just not sure it was needed. But, in Temple of Doom, we've also got the theme for the slave children, ba-da-dum bum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-ba-dum, ba-da-dum bum, ba-da-da-ba-dum. It's a great piece of music. And you have Short theme in that movie as well. Bum bum ba-da-da-ba-dum, ba-da-dum, 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 dum. Again, another great piece of music. Last Crusade, so memorable piece of music. The music for the opening sequence involving young Indy, just perfect. And then you get the theme for the Grail, bum 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 bum. God, that theme just gives me goosebumps and sends shivers down my spine. I love it so much. And also, I can say that again. And you also get the theme. There's so many. I could just go on and on. You get the point I'm making. There's so many memorable themes in the first three Indiana Jones movies. But when you get to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I don't know if I can point out that many memorable themes. I mean, I know them because I've looked at the score so many times. Say all about the movie. The score's great. But just because I know them doesn't mean like you guys would, you people watching. You get the theme for the Russians in this film, bum, 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 bum. It's a good theme, but is it as memorable as the Nazi theme from Last Crusade? Bum, 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 bum. Sign right here. I do wonder what people think sometimes when I do sing these theme tunes in these podcasts. If you like them, I don't know. If you do, let me know in the comment section below. Whatever. But anyway, yeah. The Russian theme of the film is good, but it's not as memorable as like the Nazi theme from either Raiders or Last Crusade. Then you get the theme for the Crystal Skull, the MacGuffin's film. Bum 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 bum. It's something around those lines, and it's a good musical motive. It's a good musical theme, but it's not as good as the Ark theme from Raiders or the Grail theme from Last Crusade. And there is some good pieces of music as well. Like one thing I haven't mentioned is the music for Mutt. It's a great piece of music. But is it as memorable as any of the pieces of music from the original three Indiana Jones films? And I think that's my problem with this score. Even though it's a good score, I still really like it. As I already mentioned, listened to it probably like 100 times. It's not classic John Williams. I do think it relies sometimes on some of the older Indiana Jones themes, some of the pieces of music from the first Indiana Jones movies, just a bit too much. Like, there's a lot of moments when the score for this movie quotes past Indiana Jones scores, like when Indy's talking about his father towards the end of the film. He goes, "Somewhere your grandfather is laughing." He says that to Mutt, and you get the theme for Indy and his father from Last Crusade playing in the background, and then early in the film you get the Ark theme playing. You get the Raiders march playing throughout the movie because Indiana Jones' theme, and also I said that again, and you also get towards the end of the film, you get Marion's theme playing at the wedding, which is a great scene as well. I love the way the film ends. But I'm not sure if... I think this film needed more new themes. And I think that might also be a bit of Spielberg's problem as well. I think he lost a bit of his touch when it comes to this movie. I don't think he had lost his touch. I'm just saying lost his touch with the Indiana Jones films when it came to this film. And I think because Spielberg had lost his touch with the Indiana Jones franchise, John Williams had a bit as well. But I'm hoping again with a new director for the fifth Indiana Jones film, John Williams does a great job with the score and maybe brings in some many new themes which are once again iconic. And I think maybe as well, the reason that so many of John Williams' themes aren't as iconic from this score as it had been from the previous Indiana Jones scores is because the film isn't as iconic. When people talk about the fourth Indiana Jones movie, they say it's the worst. And I understand where they're coming from. I do. I get it. It is the worst of all four Indiana Jones movies. But there's some people who say this film was absolutely terrible. And I don't think it is. I have 5 huge problems with the film, and there's so many nitpicky problems I have with it as well that I could go on and on about. But in reality, this film has some good moments as well. It has some great moments. The beginning with Hound Dog playing, I think that's a really great opening to this period that the film is set. I love the way the film ends with Indy and Marion getting married. I think there's one moment in that last scene which is a bit weird where Indy and Marion kiss and Mutt looks jealous. I don't understand why he looks jealous, but the last scene, it's a really wonderful ending to this film. Although I do think there should be more people at Indy and Marion's wedding, particularly Salah, and apparently John Rhys Davies was asked to return for this fourth Indiana Jones film, but declined, but he came back for the new one, so all is well. But I like the ending. I like the ant fight sequence. I think I can't speak. God, I've been going for so long now. How long have we been going for? Oh, we've been going for almost an hour. Sometimes when I sit down to record these podcasts, I think they're going to be like a half an hour long. They turn out to be, well, in this case, almost an hour. So I do apologise if I'm rambling on a bit. But there's good moments in this film. There's flashes of greatness even. But it's just not great overall. And the movie isn't that good. It's fine. It's entertaining. It's a good watch, and the funny thing is, if it didn't have the Indiana Jones name on it, I think I might like it a lot more. But the problem is, it does have the Indiana Jones name on it. It's called Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I mean, even that name in itself, it's a long name. That should tell you something about the quality of this film, But because it does have that the Indiana Jones name on it, and because you instantly compare this movie, because it's got the Indiana Jones name on it, to the previous Indiana Jones films, it doesn't hold up in comparison. It's not that good. It's just not that good. Because it's got a lot of things weighing it down. And I do think those big things weighing this movie down, the 5 big problems I've already talked about. Problem number 1, as I'm going to reiterate, problem number 1, it was made too late. And Spielberg and many of the filmmakers and people behind the first Indiana Jones movies who came back to the fourth Indiana Jones film just were in a very different place, when they originally did Indiana Jones. Problem number 2 is I think that the action set pieces and the action sequences in general don't have the same thrill and excitement and engagement. Those action sequences in Raiders and Last Crusade and Temple of Doom are engaging to watch, but I don't think they're as engaging in this movie. Problem number 3 is that at times, for me, it doesn't feel like enough. It doesn't feel like an Indiana Jones movie enough, with lacking villains, undeveloped characters, and a MacGuffin that takes away from the realism of the film, with the Crystal Skull. Problem number 4, I think George Lucas was out of touch with reality when he came up with the idea of the Crystal Skull in this movie. And problem number 5 is that this film just isn't that well written, and it has laughable dialogue, and it also feels like it's verging on fan fiction. And I do think there are the 5 big reasons that this film failed in comparison to the previous 2 Indiana Jones films. And it's a shame. It really is. It would have been great to have another Spielberg directed Indiana Jones movie almost 19 years, or even if it was 19 years, 19 years after Last Crusade, that was just fantastic. I wish I was sitting here defending this movie more than I have been. But even though it's got its moments, it is lackluster. And it's really not as good as it should be. With too much CGI and with moments that really question the logic, make you question the logic of this movie, and with moments that really make you question why they decided to make another Indiana Jones film after the third one ended so perfectly with the main characters riding off into the sunset. You just can't help but think that this movie should have been better. And it's a fine film, it's fine. But is that good enough for an Indiana Jones movie? I don't know. I don't think it is. The funny thing is, I will still watch this now. I've been saying all this stuff, but I will still watch this movie because there is a sense of adventure in there. It's got the worst sense of adventure of all 4 Indiana Jones movies today. I haven't seen the 5th one yet, so I can't comment, but you understand what I'm saying. It's got the worst sense of adventure of all 4 Indiana Jones movies. And, it doesn't feel enough like it earns its Indiana Jones title, but there are still things to enjoy with this film, and I do enjoy the needle drops. There's not many of them, but I enjoy when they're there. It's not a badly made film, and there are some good moments. I particularly like the ant fight sequence, as I've already mentioned, in the ending and the beginning, and so many other aspects of the film. I enjoy the performances. I enjoy seeing Marion back, although I wish she was given more to do other than just confirm that Mort is in fact Indy's son. There's parts of the film which I enjoy, and I will rewatch it, but when I'm rewatching it, I always feel like when I've sat down to rewatch this movie, like it's going to impress me this time. This will be the time that I like Crystal Skull. And then I get to it and I'm either going, it's okay, it's not bad, I just don't love it. Or I'm going, I'm never sitting there at the end going, you know what, I was wrong about Crystal Skull this entire time, and I really wish I said that. Because this film holds such a special place in my heart. As I already spoke about earlier on this podcast, this was the first film I remember seeing at the cinema. The first movie I've ever seen at the cinema. So it does hold a special place in my heart. Particularly now, 15 years later, as I'm going to see a new Indiana Jones film at the cinema tomorrow. But at the same time, come on, should have been better. So, this is an add-on. One thing I forgot to mention, I was recording my podcast on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull earlier today, and getting very sweaty doing so, is that, and I'm really not forgot to mention it as well, because I forgot to mention in my podcast on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and my YouTube review, on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull about a year ago, but that is that this was the Indiana Jones movie which gave us the Lego Indiana Jones theme. I've got a Lego Indiana Jones t-shirt here, and I just forgot to present it while I was doing the podcast. Yeah, look at that, it's a great t-shirt. But I grew up loving Lego Indiana Jones, loving the Lego Indiana Jones games, playing them continuously, and also I used to play and with all the Lego Indiana Jones sets and collect them loads, and I still buy them off the internet every now and then, because my my original Lego Indiana Jones sets have broken into pieces now and scattered all over the place in various Lego boxes that I've got in my house. So I've even bought some of the old Lego Indiana Jones sets that came around in 2008 because of this film recently on eBay, because of how much I love the Lego Indiana Jones theme. So I just wanted to mention that, that's one good thing that came out of this movie. It didn't really come out of this film, but at the same time, though, it came around because of this movie. So that's a perk for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That's another reason I have some affection for it, because without this movie, we wouldn't have had the Lego Indiana Jones theme. There you go. Anyway, back to the podcast. And there's one other thing that I want to mention that I did briefly touch on, and that is Marion Ravenwood's return in this film. Karen Allen looked like she's having a lot of fun coming back as Marion, and she's fun to watch in the movie, and there's a lot of charisma with her performance. But what is the character arc, and what is she there to do other than to tell Mort that Indy is in fact his father, and to get married to Indy at the end of the film? She's just kind of there. it's almost like jangling keys, you know what I mean? Like, oh, look, Marion's back. Oh, Marion and Indy are back on screen together the first time since Raiders. Cool. It's cool for about 5 minutes. After that, you know, that's just what a lot of this film feels like. It's cool for about 5 minutes, but then you realise, yeah, it doesn't work that well. That's how I feel when I sit there at the end after watching the movie. You know, I enjoy it, kind of, but mainly because I'm an Indiana Jones fan. And I just have this, I mean, it's not a love-hate relationship, but whenever I sit down to watch this film, I either enjoy it and think it's okay, or I'm disappointed by it. And, you know, in conclusion, I think it's a disappointing movie. That's what it is. It's a disappointing movie because it lost its spark. The Indiana Jones franchise had lost its spark when it returned for the fourth film. And I'm hoping that it will reignite its spark for the fifth installment. We'll have to wait and see. Not that long. We'll have to wait and see for that long now. But yeah, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull should have been a hell of a lot better. But I just think it was made too late. And what you get, ultimately, is a disappointing movie that should be so much better. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that the fourth Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, is a 4 out of 10. I hate to give that rating. And, you know, I'm giving it a 4 out of 10 because I still rewatch this movie. I still enjoy parts of it. There's still something about this movie which always brings me back to watching it, and perhaps it's because it's the first film I remember seeing as a kid, and it always, you know, it always brings back that memory of watching the cinema for the first time. But I really wish when I returned to this movie, I had the same excitement that I did when I rewatch Last Crusade and Temple of Doom and Raiders. That same excitement, the same engagement, the same thrill I do when I rewatch those previous Indiana Jones movies. But I just don't. And I understand why people dislike this movie. I don't dislike it, but I also don't really like it either. It's just fine. And I've gone on about how already. Let's see how long this podcast has been. It's been over an hour, so I'm going to round things up. Yep, this is a disappointing movie, and it lost its spark. It was made too long after the third film. Yeah. And it should be a hell of a lot better, as I've already said. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a 4 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that is it for today's podcast. Man alive, I went on. But hopefully you enjoyed this podcast today. And yeah, I'll be coming up with another podcast tomorrow from around my excitement for the new Indiana Jones movie. But until then, thank you as always for watching or listening, and let me know your thoughts on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in the comment section below if you're watching on YouTube. And also, I said that again, and if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. I look forward to many more podcasts coming very soon in the future. Man alive and I sweating bucket. Yes, hope you enjoy this podcast, and yeah, I suppose that's it. So I will see you guys again soon. But, you know what? Should I wear it? Yeah, I'm going to wear it. I will see you guys again soon. But, bye for now. Bye.